Welcome again to the non-dual lectionary, and with this video, I'm going to continue our discussion of the Christmas stories, this time picking up with John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. And as I talked about in the last video regarding the Christmas story in Luke, a lot of what the way the church year starts off with the lectionary, we're in year C. This is Christmas, but we start with Advent, and a lot of that is not necessarily teachings of Jesus or examples from Jesus, and not necessarily people who maybe have that full non-dual or no self-recognition themselves, at least in the story, but who are hinting at something or speaking to an intuition of something or speaking to an experience of something. With this gospel, I think we're actually starting to get to poetic words of evoking something. I think if you've had this experience or this recognition or experiences or recognitions like this, or there's something in here that you've been on the path or spent some time with that here's some, whether you've done that in another tradition entirely or not, here's some language that may speak to something that you've experienced or recognized. So I'll first read John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. It starts with, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overtake it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, or of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth." Whew. So starting at the beginning, just the notion of using the word, what this evokes out of me, and I know some people will be familiar with this, is the notions of Atman and Brahman, and there can be very nuanced understandings of this, but in a rough sense, Brahman being the sort of impersonal divine of everything, and Atman being the divine spark within, the divine true nature of the individual, and that Atman and Brahman are not two. Again, a non-dual expression there. So that first sentence, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." That's, I mean, to me, that just hits right there. Out of time, before time, in the beginning, was the Word. It was with God, and it was God. Not two, not one. Non-separation. I think, again, to me, this is now evoking, not just pointing to, not describing, but evoking our true nature that is the only part that can recognize those words. And then it does, I mean, it is speaking of the experience of John and Jesus. It's not separate from the story, from the Jesus story, whether whatever that your take may be on that, but it's not separate from that. But also, it's not only that, as in sort of the straight mythological story that we see in Luke. As we come on, then all things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the light was the light of all people. Again, I mean, I don't want to say too much about that. I think, again, that's something that if you have that experience or that recognition, here it is again, it's evoking that. And if you're close to that, and especially if you're familiar with the Christian tradition, hearing that with new ears, I think can start to evoke something that you might want to explore yourself. Then we get the connection with the Jesus story. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light. So we're getting a link between Jesus and the Word and the light. But again, it's not uniqueness to him. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. And so we can say that it came in through Jesus, just as we can say it came in through all enlightened people, but it enlightens everyone. It is the true nature underneath all of us. And we've talked about John and the sort of pointer, the person who's maybe not quite there yet themselves, but who recognizes something beyond themselves. And I think that chapter 6 or verse 6 through 9 right there speaks to that too. And then again, evoking the Jesus story or pointing to the Jesus story and the connections with this notion here. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. I know that the link always in the church is that this is talking about Jesus and Jesus uniquely, but read it again. The light, forget he, right? The light was in the world, and the world came into being through him. Yet the world did not know him. That our true nature is the foundation, and yet we do not recognize it. And it again, just evoking that experience, that recognition, pointing to it in such in a way that, and this is what I alluded to at the very first introductory video, that if you were in the Jewish tradition 2,000 years ago, this may be the only language you have. You may have different language in a Hindu or a Buddhist context that maybe is more direct, that's less confusing, and that doesn't quite lead quite as much to the mythological belief system that's built up around Christianity. But again, in that context, knowing that people are trying to give expression to something that they've experienced and knowing that that's the context, looking at these words, I think it's unmistakable. All who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, not a unique son of God that stands alone, but all who receive the light and the word belief here, I don't like. Let's put that aside. But all who received that have the ability, have the true, have the innate drive, whatever you want to call it, drive instinct to become, and it's really to recognize that they are already children of God, who were born of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, yes, maybe through Jesus, and we have seen his glory, but not as uniquely only Jesus. The Word became flesh and lived among us and lives among us today uh, in our spirit itself, in our true nature, if we can only grasp it ourselves. Um, and yeah, so just going back a little bit, right, that he himself was not the light. The true light was which enlightens everyone was coming into the world. And he gave power to become children of God. Alan Watts talks about how Christianity, made Jesus the unique Son of God, which was a way of dealing with the heresy, right, of Jesus saying that he and the Father were one. Um, that was a heresy at the time, and the way that the Judeo-Christian tradition addressed it was to make Jesus uniquely the Son of God and put us back on the side of not. First, Jesus and all of us were not, and then there was a decision to put Jesus on the God side and the rest of us not. But unmistakable right here. The light gave power to become children of God. We are not on the other side. So in the beginning was the Word, the Atman, the true nature of our self from the beginning, from before time. And the Word was with God, the true nature underlying all things. And the Word was God. It was with and it was. It's not separate, not two, but not one.